to the table to give evidence to the committee, Mr. Justin Tuddy. Thank you for coming before the committee. We appreciate you taking the time to speak to the committee and look forward to hearing from you today. This is a formal proceeding of the committee, and the protections of parliamentary privilege and the obligation not to mislead the committee apply. This is a public hearing and is webcast through the Assembly's website. A transcript will be made for use of the committee and may be put on the committee's website. If at any time during the hearing you are concerned what you will say should not be made public, you may ask the committee to go into a closed session and take your evidence in private. Could you please state your name and the capacity in which you are appearing?
Yeah, good day. My name's Justin. I'm a member of the public.
And before we begin, I'll just introduce the fellow members of the committee. We have the member for Gwoja, Mr. Chansey Paech, the member for Drysdale, Mr. Clinton Howe, the member for Johnston, Justine Davis, and the member for Wanguri is joining us by telecommunication behind you. And I'm Andrew Mackay, the member for Goyder. Would you like to make an opening statement?
Yeah, start with full respect for 𝐸𝐸𝐶𝐞. That's not a token gesture. I fully endorse the contribution from the 𝐸𝐸𝐶𝐞 Nation and their recommendations. Also commend the contribution from 𝐸𝐸𝐶𝐞 Development Corporation, 𝐸𝐸𝐶𝐞 man Nigel Brown. I welcome the contributions from, I noticed 𝐸𝐸𝐶𝐞 people, Eric 𝐓𝐸𝐞𝐲, Dr. Richard 𝐓𝐸𝐞𝐲. So, yeah, I acknowledge we're in 𝐸𝐸𝐶𝐞 country, but I'm thanking 𝐸𝐸𝐶𝐞 people for their leadership on this issue. I also note from the 𝐸𝐸𝐶𝐞 Nation response their expression of solidarity with other Aboriginal people around the NT. And I read the contributions from the NLC, the CLC, and the peak orgs. There's some great recommendations there. A quick bit about me. My first job a week out of high school was in the oil and gas industry. I've worked in mining services. There's many of us from the industry who care about better regulation. Came up here in '98 with a few thousand friends. And since then, I've been really interested in environmental policy reform, planning and assessment. Yeah, just a couple of things which maybe, I'm still getting my head around all this. Yeah, going over my notes, I noticed a few errors in my contribution. Most of all, the omission of Section 52, which requires responsible entities who are making statutory decisions or performing statutory processes to not be inconsistent with any territory development area plan, irrespective of any existing NT law. I am so sorry I missed that previously. It's quite outrageous. So I've been looking at this kind of stuff for like 25 years. This has got to be the most audacious bill I've ever seen. Yeah, nothing like it comes close in the NT. I think I heard someone mumble earlier that this is the kind of legislation that's happening around the country. It's not. Queensland, we had that state assessment referral.
Yeah, Coordinator General or something in Queensland. It's got a different title, but yeah, same body, like same in type of body.
There was Economic Development Act. There was also, they did something about priority development areas, but the powers in there don't come close to this. I've always looked down on South Australia's Indenture Act, but now I'm wondering, if you're going to do this, why can't you focus a little? Anyway, I might leave it there and welcome your questions.
I'll open it up to the committee for questions.
Sure.
I see the member for Gwoja's
I'm
ready to go.
Yes. Well, thank you, Justin, and thank you for your submission. I really want to acknowledge that you've taken the time to do a very comprehensive submission, and that takes time in the short notice period that was put out. So first of all, I just want to acknowledge that. Quite a comprehensive submission you've put in, which has prompted us to allow us to ask a number of questions. So I'll pose some questions. Please feel free if you need further clarification on any of them, or it enables you to further highlight another area. Please feel free to do so. I just wanted to look at your submission, and I just wanted to talk about, in your submission you talk about the powers and that the bill certainly looks at proposing, and when we're talking about the exemption notices, that they should require independent external approval rather than just ministerial discretion. I'm just wanting to, I suppose, get a response from you around what should an external review process look like, and what could that body potentially look at? Because I guess, sorry, Justin, the government, the CLP has the numbers on the committee, they have the numbers on the government. The bill's going to obviously pass, unfortunately. So we want to make sure that we have the best chance at putting a number of recommendations up through this committee for the government to consider to make possible amendments. So I'm just wanting to ascertain we're getting the best understanding from you around how we can advocate to the government for improvements.
Yeah. I guess the easiest way is to remove the powers for issuance of notices, and I guess now Section 52. You know, there's definitely value in coordination. There's definitely value in identifying areas and infrastructure areas. That'll make sense. This bill would still make sense without those powers, and that would be my first recommendation. If not, like, I think there is no simple answer to your question, I'm sorry, Chansey, because what this bill does is to eradicate so many values of natural justice, of merit-based decision-making, that I can't offer you one simple recommendation. And I am sorry, I have offered you 100, and now maybe they don't all line up to the new version of the bill. I do think that a couple of obvious things is that a notice about an intent to issue a notice should be given to Parliament first before it is actually done. That's pretty simple and concrete and achievable. We could have an independent authority, or we could employ like 𝐶𝐞. We could empower 𝐶𝐞 to perform that kind of role that you described.
Well, I guess that goes to your second part, Justin. You in your submission, you highlight the bill's broad exemption powers create a risk of corruption or political interference. So you would be suggestive that 𝐶𝐞 could potentially be a mechanism that is introduced into the bill to prevent or address that issue?
Well, they're like an obvious existing body who could take on some additional associated work about reviewing the functions of the coordinator or the use of those powers.
Any further questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Chansey?
No, you're right.
Yeah, I want to thank you as well, Justin, for the work you've put into this, and that it was very helpful. Your summary of the changes between the two versions of the bill were very helpful, so thank you. I've got a couple of questions. One is that you've talked a lot about the impact on Indigenous land rights, and one of the changes between the two versions of the bill was the inclusion of the Heritage Act in the new version. I'm just wondering whether you could comment on how you think that might impact on issues that you've outlined that you're concerned about.
Oh, yeah, maybe a little. I don't know that the Heritage Act does a lot for Indigenous heritage. I mean, we've got a few examples.
Yeah.
But I guess that's rights which will be lost through the application of this bill.
Okay. A couple more questions. So you've taught that going to the issues that you've raised in your submission. You've noted that the bill allows the minister to designate infrastructure coordination areas beyond specific projects, which could potentially affect broader land use decisions. I wonder if you could share how you think that discretion to expand infrastructure coordination, ICAs, could lead to unintended consequences for land use or for community interests?
Yeah, that is an interesting one, because that's one of those changes by regulation which remain. So one of the improvements between the two drafts is that there were quite a number of permitted changes by regulation, and there's problems with that, obviously. And a number of those were addressed, but a few remain. That's one of those. The Chief Minister can, by regulation, change the criteria by which those areas can be extended. Yep. So they're no longer necessarily about even the primary principle or the criteria related to major projects that are laid out in the bill. It could be for any reason. But it goes beyond that as well, because, you can't draw dotted straight lines around nature. It doesn't work that way. And so the decisions we make in an area will bleed out the edge and impact surrounding areas.
Could you give a very layperson example of what that might look like?
Yeah, sure. Well, a really obvious example is that the Gordian finch is not going to stay in that small area with the dotted line around it at the dam at Lee Point. Imagine we have a declared area which is going to be concreted. Obviously, anything there is gone. We think we know what species were there, but different animals at different times of year might visit different areas. They might have a wider range. They might have different food needs or habitat needs. And in that way, what we've done in that area will impact life surrounding it.
Yeah. In ways that I think could be unintended, but sometimes are also foreseeable consequences that we're not necessarily taking into account.
Right, but to some level they are taken into account by our existing laws.
Can I do one more?
Yeah, go.
You also pointed out, and you've just made reference that the bill allows the executive to expand its scope through regulation rather than requiring parliamentary approval. Can you talk a bit about your concerns about that, once again, maybe in layperson's terms? I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, obviously I was really disturbed to see that Nuclear Waste Prohibition Act included in the schedule, and now it's out. But, next year someone might, by regulation, add it. Actually, anything could be added back. So I think an important defence against that might be to include a block list. So specifically in the bill, say, you're never going to add this. So, this bill is never going to interfere with the Nuclear Waste Prohibition, Sacred Sites Act, and whatever else we agree, through our discussions, shouldn't be affected by this bill. That way, even if we retain that power to add other acts by regulation, which I don't think should exist. It's not necessary. It can be done by amendment, which only means that Parliament has oversight. You can still make that change. If it's a good change that's needed, you just go to Parliament, change the law. But if we're going to keep that add an act by regulation, then perhaps we should have a block list as well.
So you have, Justin, just to be clear, we heard this morning from a number of key witnesses advocating that whilst they're not supportive of the bill, there needs to be a provision where sacred sites is enshrined in that bill that it cannot be touched, so that it's not sneakily done in regulation later, so that these environmental protection areas or Indigenous protected areas or the radioactive waste are enshrined that they are absolute no-go zones. It's a breach of the law if you do go there, rather than relying on the goodwill of the government of the day to say, we said we're not going to go there, we're not going to go there. It needs to be, at a minimum, enshrined there that they are, it's against the law to go there.
Yeah, put it in writing.
Yeah, okay. And just another question. In your submission, you warn that the bill could violate the Northern Territory and Commonwealth bilateral agreement under the EPBC Act, and could potentially lead to a federal intervention or legal challenges on projects in the Northern Territory. Given one of the most controversial topics in the Territory is water and gas, is that a real concern around the Territory Coordinator ignoring the 𝐠𝐶𝐫 and those types of works?
I'd like you to draw your attention to the contribution from INPEX, their last paragraph encourages the NT government to pursue agreements with the Commonwealth to streamline regulation. That's exactly what the EPBC is. That's exactly what the bilateral agreements are about. They're carefully constructed over many years. Was it 98, 99, Senator Robert Hill? Okay, focus, where are we? I am very concerned that inadequate attention has been given to the very real risk that application of the powers in this bill could easily lead to a review of that bilateral agreement, which would almost inevitably result in more duplication of regulation.
Yeah. And Justin, you're a member of the community. Do you think that this bill is in line with the community expectations when it comes to environmental protections and regulation?
I expect to be informed of pending decisions, and I expect to be able to have my say. This bill takes those rights away.
Thank you.
We've got time for another question as well, if you'd like.
I guess, Justin, I know Chansey asked you earlier if there's any specific recommendations that you'd highlight as we know this bill is likely to pass, hopefully with some amendments. I know you've done a lot of work on talking about what they could look like. I'm just wondering, while you're here, are there any that you haven't mentioned that you'd like to highlight or make sure that the committee can consider?
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate my frustration about Section 52.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit confused about how this committee interfaces with Parliament, but I do hope that you can make recommendations about the risk in EPBC.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think we need proactive parliamentary assent to issuance of notices.
Yeah.
As it's written, I think it's only the exemption powers which have to be reported to Parliament within a few sitting days or whatever, which could be, I don't know, could be a few weeks, couldn't it? Or
Could be,
month,
yeah,
or...
depending on when it, yeah.
And then Parliament has a few days to disallow it. There's a few problems with that. One is that anything done in that period is still valid. So, I mean, it really invites a certain type of risky gamification by the developers. Sorry, I've lost the plot.
Talking about parliamentary oversight of exemption.
Yeah.
Well, it's retrospective as
well.
well.
Yeah, and it's not required. It's not required of Parliament, and so it might happen that you might be at work that day, and someone might have pinged you, you might have noticed, and it gets discussed. It should be required that Parliament is informed. Okay, these powers are going to be used, and Parliament purposefully and deliberatively decides whether or not to disallow it. As you say, the CLP have the numbers. There's no risk to them doing that, is there? If the majority of members of Parliament agree it's a good idea, then it's just a tick and flick, isn't it? What is it? We've waited a few weeks, we said. Is a few weeks what we're trying to cure?
Any further questions?
No, thank you. Thanks, Justin.
Thank you, Justin.
On behalf of the committee, let me thank you for your time and the incredible dedicated work that you put into your submission. Without the backing of an organisation, it's incredible. So thank you for that, and thank you for taking the time to come see us today. Welcome everyone to this public hearing into the Territory Coordinator Bill 2025. I welcome to the table to give evidence to the committee, Ms. Catherine McLeish. Thank you for coming before the committee. We appreciate you taking the time to speak to the committee and look forward to hearing from you today. This is a formal proceeding of the committee, and the protections of parliamentary privilege and the obligation not to mislead the committee apply. This is a public hearing and is being webcast through the Assembly's website. A transcript will be made for use of the committee and may be put on the committee's website. If at any time during the hearing you are concerned that what you say should not be made public, you may ask the committee to go into a closed session and take your evidence in private. Could you please state your name and the capacity in which you are appearing?
I'm Catherine McLeish and I'm appearing as a private citizen.
Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge my fellow committee members that are here today. So we have the member for Gwoja, Mr. Chansey Paech. We have the member for Drysdale, Mr. 𝐶𝐿 Howe. The member for Johnston, Justine Davis. And joining us via the Teams is the member for Wanguri, Miss Ollie Carlson. And I'm Andrew Mackay, the member for Goyder. Ms. McLeish, would you like to make an opening statement?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I would hopefully just a shortish one. Thank you to the committee and to all your busy staff for organising to re-enliven this committee. I think it's really important, and I'm really pleased that I've been able to make a submission that might be useful. It's a very unofficial submission because it's just me and my understanding of our community and bits and pieces. So hopefully, yeah, I think that's democracy though. So in addition to the submission that I've made, I thought I might mention three more things for now. One is that between submitting and today, I found a 2020 Productivity Commission report that I have provided to the committee secretary, which is about resource industry regulation, which aligns with my submission, which is better regulation and better resourcing rather than less regulation. The crux of that report is that to ensure public confidence in resource projects, which I think we all agree is required, you need public confidence in the regulatory regime. My submission says that this bill undermines both of those things, the regulatory regime and therefore public confidence in projects. So it's not really good for industry, I would think, from outside of industry or anybody else. I do want to submit that coming into government with a majority, but enacting exemptions to well-established laws is somewhat arrogant, it's somewhat ignorant, and I think it's anti-democratic. And these are, I don't say that lightly, but these are things that are being discussed in my circles in the community at the moment in regards to this proposal. So I'm really pleased that this committee is here to have a look at this, quite slightly radical bill. Secondly, I recalled that the CLP, like Labor before, had promised to implement the PEPA recommendations, and I think this bill sets the government up to break that promise. There's been a lot of focus on the importance of those recommendations in good regulation for the Territory, and so I think that's a good promise to keep. And thirdly, in addition to the more substance, I guess, in my written submission, I'm fairly troubled by the current and former government's open hostility, hostile rhetoric towards environmentalists. And I've been a bit shocked many times at the quickness of our leaders to dismiss an entire group of our community and voters in that way. I would observe that most Australians are environmentalists. We live in a really extreme climate. We don't have to, but we do. We stay and we move here. We fish, we camp, we hike, we kill cane toads, we brave cyclones, and we brave extreme heat. We're all environmentalists and we're all living in the environment. I ask, what is driving our elected leaders to be so anti-environment? Who are they listening to? I have heard the second last speaker before me, and I have to say that I'm not the only voter who is quite sick of hearing the gas industry tell us what's good for the NT. It's no surprise that every time we ask them what's good for the NT, they say gas. So we could just stop asking them. I think we understand what they're on about. I think I would like them to worry about doing their job, stop complaining about regulatory burden, and just get their proper approvals and let the Parliament do its job in other areas. Hopefully everybody here and hopefully everybody elected is already aware that Darwin and much of Northern Australia is forecast to be unlivable in decades coming due to dangerous extreme heat. That's not only my kids' lifetime, but that's my lifetime. And I think this should be the basis of urgent action in the House. I see that you're hearing from environmental experts in this process, which is important, and that's not my role here. So I'm here because I want to represent a common view in the community that we want better governance, not less governance. Pardon me for a sec. I don't think voters, people, want to replace risk assessments by experts in government departments by risk assessments by non-experts, two non-experts being the Chief Minister and the Territory Coordinator. That's not good governance. That's why I say this is quite a radical bill. I think it's anti-democratic, and frankly, it's hugely open to political influence and, frankly, corruption. If big projects are so good for us, they can navigate our normal regulatory regime just as middle-sized businesses do. If they can't, then perhaps they're not fit to do business in a way that could jeopardise the territory. I don't think we should blame our public service if proponents are not providing sufficient information and planning to get their timely approvals, or if it is the departments who are struggling to assess projects in good time, then let's resource them better. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll open it up to the committee for any questions.
Yes. Thank you for coming in. I'd just like to, reading through your submission, points on especially liberties and individual liberties, and I'd just like to open the floor to you to expand on that, but importantly, what recommendations you would like to see from us as a committee that could strengthen it, and not just in that aspect, but across the bill. So first, if we look at those, that individual liberty piece, and then any other recommendations you would like to see as well.
Sure. Look, it's not an area that I guess I have I've had an expert deep dive into, but basically it's looking to cut out processes that, to my knowledge, involve the community in, perhaps having scientific reports done and cultural reports done that have to consult community. I'm not completely across.
Yeah,
all
no,
of the ways
that's
that
fine.
This bill changed.
Yeah.
But I think it reduces public involvement, and it reduces expert involvement, and it greatly reduces transparency. And I think we're seeing in Australian politics and NT politics that people do want transparency, and I think this is cutting a great big hole in transparency of how major projects might proceed in the territory, and I think that's really sad for this community, and I think it's really risky for the economy. And I think what will happen is that individuals and organisations will dispute more decisions, and I think this bill probably leaves the door wide open for dispute, and I think they'll be protracted and they'll be complicated and they'll be messy, they'll be cross-jurisdictional, and they'll be funded. And I think that's not a good way to do business. I think the way that I would like to see the territory doing business is to have good regulation so people know what to expect and they know the timelines. So if you want to assist them with the timelines, I think creating more uncertainty probably doesn't do that.
Thank you. Do you think transparency measures, I'm thinking from our perspective as a committee, do you think that would be positive?
I'm sorry.
Do you think if we were to recommend some forms of transparency measures, do you think that would be a positive introduction to the bill?
I think that there are some really significant parts of the bill that are just that are removing transparency. So I think the appointment of the coordinator is not transparent. The removal of the coordinator is not transparent. Unless I've read it wrong, because this is just a hobby of mine, the way that the coordinator or chief minister might choose a project for exemption is not transparent. So remove all of those things. I think this parliament at this point in our political world could really focus on transparency.
Yeah. Thank you. I've got no further questions.
Catherine, firstly, thank you for taking the time to put together a very considered submission. Even if you think it is a hobby, it's definitely a good hobby to have. So thank you very much for taking that. And of course, your deputation today is very passionate. You can absolutely see that, and I want to acknowledge that. I guess from where I'm sitting, from what I've heard today, I'm not in a position to be very comfortable with where the proposed bill is. But obviously, the government have the numbers on the committee and they have the numbers on the floor of Parliament. So part of my role as a committee member and other members is to look at what recommendations we can put in. So just building on what the member for Drysdale spoken about and previous expert witnesses today, there's the need for an element of exemptions for particular areas of land. We heard from the top end coastal reserves, top end coastlines.
Top end.
Sorry, it's been a long day. But around
top end coast healthy.
Around having the marine parks, it being enshrined in the legislation that they're exempt, that the Aboriginal protected areas are exempt, that heritage legislation is exempt, that sacred sites legislation is exempt. And I do want to acknowledge the government haven't put in there that it's not exempt or it is exempt, but we've heard from Arid Lands Environment Centre today that it could be done by regulation later. So just in terms of putting recommendations forward, would you be inclined to agree that it would be important to have, at a bare minimum, those level of exemptions? And then in addition to that, are there any reporting mechanisms that you would recommend back to the committee that we put into our report? So obviously we heard earlier from, I think it was the Australian energy producers, I'm not sure. One of them was talking about there is a section around exemptions that comes back to, it was Justine, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Around how does that decision come about to be made and on what grounds is the Territory Coordinator making that ruling? Because there are 32 pieces of legislation that we're requiring one person to have all of the tertiary understanding and to be above all of those. So I'm just trying to look at ways that we can recommend as a committee consideration of the government. Do you have anything in terms of, as a community member, as a concerned community member, what level of accountability could be brought into the committee to give the community an understanding that there isn't an independent process around that accountability and integrity?
Around the accountability of what the coordinator may do?
Yes, yeah.
That's a very long question.
Sorry.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I don't know the bill inside out. I think the concept that, was it 32 areas of legislation would potentially be exempted, you said?
Yeah. Because I guess an example is someone said today 𝐝𝐞𝐞, but the 𝐝𝐞𝐞 can't tell you that they're investigating because that area is under investigation. So in terms of giving the public that certainty that there is appropriate mechanisms for this role, there really is no independent.
Yeah, so I can't get my head around how a government seeking to be transparent could communicate clearly with the public or with myself, speak for myself, about how these decisions could possibly be made to not abide by 32 pieces of legislation because one person who's quite busy being the Chief Minister or being the Territory Coordinator decided that that was appropriate and that the risks were acceptable. I don't see how you could allay the community's fears about lack of transparency about these powers being used in the way that they're drafted.
Yeah, so because there'd be no, I guess, the community would be concerned about a decision around water or environmental development, and there's expert advice, the controller or the chief minister's gone against that, and there's no mechanism in place to compel them to justify why they've gone against that.
Yeah, it's dark. I can't really imagine how that would happen in a way that you could say to the community, this is legitimate. Yeah, I think the question answers itself if I can answer that way.
Yeah, and Do you think that an independent environmental commissioner should be established to help oversee and hold the territory coordinator accountable?
I can't say I've thought about that or what that position might do, but I think we've got like a quite detailed regulatory regime for environmental approvals. So seeking to, for particular projects, completely put it aside and have one or two positions plus maybe a commissioner, that seems like a kind of a big job, and I don't think it washes with community expectations.
Yep.
Any further questions from the committee?
I think Justine. Oh, okay. No problems. Yeah, look, I guess thank you very much for the time. I guess you've identified the biggest risks of fast-tracking those development areas. You've provided in your submission the areas of concern. I guess from your understanding, you've provided an opportunity for us to consider different elements. Is there anything in addition to that you would like the committee to just consider or further investigate?
I guess, I mean, I could say that I'm interested that this committee exists and I'm thankful for that, and I think I'm not going to be the only one watching how you manage to balance all the different information that comes in and make some robust recommendations. And then, I mean, I heard our Chief Minister on the radio this week saying that the bill would progress, but I assume that what she meant was, depending on what this committee might recommend, it will progress somewhere. Yeah, I think there's some real like public trust issues here, and I think having a week or something to make submissions and you've got 300 really speaks to that. So thank you for being here.
So, Catherine, I've got one more question. Sorry, and I've asked this of other members. The Chief Minister claims that this piece of legislation is being pushed forward because it's in line with community expectations when it comes to the environment, development and the economy. You're a community member. Do you think this bill is in line with community expectations?
No, not at all. I think it's I think it's a shady way to do government is to make exemptions from our normal laws. I think that like there was a discussion before about social licence for projects, and I noted that the AEP spokesperson said that Territorians are coming to realise that gas is critical. I don't know if he's got sources for that. I don't agree with that. I've seen lots of evidence to the contrary, and I'm living in conversations to the contrary. I think Territorians have realised for a long time, and increasingly, that gas is currently critical. It's keeping the lights on, peak times, but it's not what the community expects for our future. It's not how to get ahead. It's not really up to the gas industry to tell us what is good for us. So I think there's a bit of a closeness there that people can see really clearly between industry and policy making, and we don't like it. We're not silly. I think if the AEP are asked about their climate policy, they probably should know it, because another thing that gentleman submitted was that he referred to support opponents of fossil fuels. I think what he would find is that the global scientific community, since at least 1970 or 80, are opponents of fossil fuels, and that's why I spoke earlier about the demonisation of environmentalists and the demonisation of people who dare to raise climate change and the increasing heat and the future of this place and all of the biodiversity that we actually love and interact with day by day here in our lives.
So, Catherine,
I think that community expectation is that we look after this
you have
place
just
that we
further
live in.
expanded. Do you think that in terms of this bill and the rest of the political landscape at the moment, the defunding of environmental advocacy and research groups plays into people having mistrust around what the government's legislative agenda is?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's anti-democratic. I think that this is a civil society. This is a first world country, and people, everyone has an interest in the environment. No one's profiting out of running the ECNT or whatever. This is because people give up their free time between earning a living and raising our kids and trying to get some sleep. We give up our free time to stick up for the environment because it can't do it itself. And so to undermine those organisations, which run on probably not very much money at all, but then to give like millions and billions of dollars to the fossil fuel industry at this point in human history, I think it's not in line with community expectations.
Thank you very much.
On behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank you for your time, and I would like to again highlight, as a private individual making a submission, you take time out of your day to do it. You've made time to appear at the, 2 o'clock on a Wednesday with only a few days' notice, and it's very much appreciated. So thank you for your time today, and thank you for your submission.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.